My name is Claudia Green, and this is She Did That, the podcast shining a spotlight on remarkable women who are breaking barriers and proving that greatness knows no gender. From female founders who have raised millions of pounds, the investors changing the landscape as we know it, to survivors of tragedy who have achieved the amazing and many more. We will share the stories of these incredible women who will inspire and empower you. In order to support us and these women, please subscribe on your viewing or listening channel of choice so we can continue our mission of sharing the stories that should and need to be heard. Nat, wonderful to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we did work together for a long time.
We did.
A grand 48 hours.
Yeah, less than probably. Yeah.
Was it less than 48 hours?
Officially.
It was a wonderful 48 hours.
It really was beautiful, yeah.
I was sad that it wasn't longer.
We would have been good.
We'd have been a power team.
We would have done.
Okay, well, I've got you here now. There's still time. So, well, I've got lots to delve into today because I obviously want to talk about your history and how you climbed your own career ladder, but then also your perspective from being a chief people officer, because obviously you're the one that has kind of a bird's eye view of companies. Yeah. Arguably, you're the only person in the organization that sees everything. Yeah. So I think it's really interesting to get your perspective on what works, what doesn't work, maybe some horror stories.
Plenty.
Okay. Yeah. We'd like some of those. So let's start with how you made your way into the world of people in HR.
So classic, I think, did psychology as an undergraduate, like we all do when you don't want to be a doctor or a lawyer, you don't know what else to do. So you go and do psychology, loved business psychology, found it really fascinating, went into the working world and then realized actually I kind of like the business side too. So naturally then thought HR might be the right way to go. Like it's a bit of psychology, it's a bit of business acumen, put them both together. So I did a master's where I lived with my grandparents for a year, which is just the best thing ever because I got sport rolled in, got lots of work done. It was so dreamy. And from there, I decided to try and go into HR. My first job was in recruitment in London. So I'm from a tiny village in the middle of nowhere, 100 people.
100 people?
Went down to London and I was like, holy bananas, this is a bit intense. And I was working at Michael Page at the time, which is also quite an intense environment.
It's a big outfit.
Lasted 6 months. Don't mind admitting it wasn't for me. Like very KPI driven, a bit intense, but placed myself into a people role.
Did you?
And so got a bit of commission and then managed to get into the in-house side. And that was me. I love it. And I still love it. And the reasons I love it are exactly the same as they were when I was 21 doing a people assistant role to what I'm doing now at 37, still doing the same sort of bit dramatic at times, meaty. Some of it's quite boring and admin heavy. You get to work with everybody at different levels, different industries, different roles within businesses. I love all of that, the variety. And that's where I'm kind of hoping to stay. I think I've definitely found you change the parts of HR that you love as you become more self-aware and like more aware of your own boundaries, what you can take home, what you can't take home, that side of things. But all in all, like it's very much a happy place for me.
And what is it that you love about fostering good cultures and working so closely with people teams?
I think the thing I love about it the most is when it goes really well, it's like incredible, like it's a game changer. So when a culture is just on point, everyone feels really trusted. Everyone's working at like 100 miles an hour at their own pace, like their own 100 miles an hour. It just works and you see like growth or you see whatever they need to achieve happens. And I also find it fascinating. And I do enjoy this part of the job, even though it's not positive. When it's a bit of a messy culture or it's not positive, seeing the impact that actually has day to day on whether it's an individual or whether it's on the business and how you can tweak it. So I think I find both fascinating, but I love working in those environments where everyone's just like on great form and everyone's operating at their best level.
Yeah, that's always ideal.
Yeah. That's
as opposed to the messy ones.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you secured your first leadership role within venture capital, you quite literally were about to go into labour.
I signed my contract, I think, on the Friday and went into labour on the Sunday.
How was that experience for you?
Do you know, first of all, I would say the whole experience of like falling pregnant, being pregnant, going for interviews is like so many levels of it really hard. Like the pregnancy journey is tough. I feel very blessed we got 3 beautiful kids out of it, but all of it's really tough. And I think I've learned now from the employer side we can be much kinder through all of those processes. But waddling into forward partners when I was 8.5 months pregnant as literally like a little womble was entertaining for everyone in the room as well as me, I think.
I remember seeing you. I was like, who's that heavily pregnant lady waiting in reception?
I was like rolling myself in. I remember really clearly from the interview, I had to ask them to put the aircon on because I was like dripping in sweat and everyone else was wearing like a gilet and a scarf. And I also remember really clearly, like I had to like hoik my like belly over and get comfortable. And like, they all sort of stopped what they were saying and were looking at me as if to say, what are you doing? Like, it was so, but one thing I would say is I felt, and I mean this in a positive way, I wasn't treated at all differently. Like I came into that and I was in the same process as everybody else. I went through the same stage as everybody else. The only difference for me was they definitely rushed the bit at the end. We all did, because I didn't want to go into labour being in the middle of London when I didn't live in London. But it was an incredible experience. I also think at the end of your pregnancy, you kind of think like, why the hell not? Like, fuck it. I'm already like at this point, I might as well give it a go. Worst case scenario, I don't get it. And that was definitely a good attitude to have, I think, going in for an interview.
Did you think it might hinder you, the fact that your water might break?
That definitely. Like, how on earth will I respond to this? I would test like with my husband on the way in and be like, right, I'm going to try calling you just in case I have an emergency. And I remember him not answering on the way into forward partners. And I was like, hang on, so if it does happen, you're not answering your phone, what will I do? Will someone in the business have to deliver my baby? I mean, I was dramatic, but...
I don't think they were equipped to deliver your baby.
Definitely not. But I think I interestingly went through the emotions of like, they're not going to hire me. I definitely had that opinion very quickly in the process. Why would they hire someone that's pregnant? They can find someone that will probably be able to start work in a month or 2 months or 3 months. And what I did do to compensate for that, I started work very quickly after I had my first.
You did? You only had, how many weeks did you have off?
I took 3 months, and then after 3 months did a week a month until 6 months, and I went back in full time. And that was me compensating for trying to be like a good employee. And if I had my time again, I mean, that was one of my best jobs and I really loved it. And I still very much enjoy what we did there. But would I have rather had a year with my son? 100%. Like 100%. And I've done the same with all of my kids, actually taken very short mat leaves because of the need to go back to work or the guilt, I think, of going back to work. But the reality is you go back to work and then you have the mum guilt. And then that's actually 10 times worse, by far the worst.
You're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Exactly. And then your husband hates you a little bit because you're grumpy. I mean, there's just all these bits that come into play. But it's made me really conscious of it. So now, for example, if I'm hiring, I will always throw the maternity policy into the interview process somehow, just to make sure someone feels like they don't have to ask for it, but it's available. And if someone is pregnant and they tell us in the interview process, just make sure they understand that they're going to be treated the same, because people hear that but don't necessarily believe it. And I think people need to bring that to life a little bit.
But it does kind of hinder things for some people, 100%. Realistically, because if you're hiring and interviewing people and you hear that person is going to need 6 months off, you know, you think, well, I'm going to hire this person and then they're going to be off and I'm going to have to find someone in the interim and it's going to be an absolute mess. So whether we like it or not, even people with the best intentions, it does hinder 100% your chances of getting roles. And
I think the interesting thing is some employers are much more progressive thinkers now around like, this person's a perfect candidate. We either wait longer and we work out our interim solution, which will probably cost a little bit more, granted. There's also, I've seen some really great stuff and read some really great stuff recently about people that employ you before you have your baby in the interview process and then give you your mat leave as an employee, which is what they should do, rather than people starting after their maternity leave. But I think it's the good companies that are doing that. Yeah. And I think that there are also, and I understand this from a cash flow perspective, companies who need someone on the ground tomorrow. Yeah. And therefore they're not really willing to wait, but that fundamentally is wrong.
Yeah, I do agree with that, because getting the right candidate, getting the wrong candidate costs you way more money, headache and time than it does to just wait. Yeah. Exactly. 6 months, for example, for the right person.
Exactly that. Or even longer sometimes. Yeah. But actually, like, is that okay? Consult the person who's going on maternity leave around what they might need in the interim to get you through to when they come back in from mat leave. Yeah. Just involve them in the process potentially. But I understand also it's an unknown. They haven't proven themselves in the role yet. But you're hiring based on their potential and their performance. And that's the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to make it easier for yourself, you then decided to do it twice more.
I did.
So you've had 3 babies.
Yes.
Was there any time in between pregnancy? Were you gave birth, got pregnant, got pregnant?
Yeah. 18 months apart to the day. So my eldest is 4.5, Hugh, Ernest is 3, and then Georgette's 18 months. It is intense. Like it is.
That's a lot.
It's intense. And I think I say this not in a proud way. I probably kill myself a little bit trying to do it all. Because you read these books about like, you can have it all and, you know, all of these things. And I'm not saying you can't, but I do think that comes with some sacrifice. And for me, it came from like, it came with burning out a little bit, not having much time for myself. Or like my time for myself became like eating a banana on the way for school run, like, or listen to a podcast instead of listening to Disney on the way to the, you know, it wasn't really time for myself, really. So I think there's definitely pros and cons of the working parenting piece.
Well, there's the working parenting piece, and then there's being a new mum, which comes with its own set of challenges.
100%.
Mentally and physically. And you've essentially done that 3 times over.
Yeah.
But if someone were to look at your LinkedIn profile or your CV, they would never guess that you had 3 children in quick succession of each other, because you seem to have still managed to climb the career ladder and achieve what looks like all of your goals.
Yeah. And I would say I think I have achieved them all. But it's definitely taken a lot of work and time away from the family, which isn't something I'm proud of. So it's a bit of a balance to be had. I think what I've definitely done now, though, or I did after my second boy, is put in some really good boundaries. And I got that from a coach of mine. The coach who basically called me out being like, what are you doing? Stop thinking superwoman is like a good thing to have. Because I definitely got told that a lot by friends, by family. You're such a superwoman. You're doing so well in your career and you got all these kids. And because people were telling me that, I wanted to be superwoman.
Yeah.
And if you ask me now, like, I'm like, no, I don't. I want to be like a great mum, a great employee, good wife, not great, good wife, not great. That's like a really great friend, you know? Like, I just wanted to, those are the bits that are important to me in my life now. And now I'm really clear with my boundaries. So I block out my kid time and I won't have my phone. So if you slack me between 4:30 and 7, you just have to wait. And that's sort of my boundaries now. And it took me a long time to get there. Like I would say in the last 18 months is when I really got to it.
But you need boundaries though.
100%.
But it's also for your own sort of mental sanity.
Yeah.
To, you know, no, this is work time, this is kid time.
Yeah.
Instead of wondering, how long did I spend with the kids today? Or
exactly,
was it only half an hour? Or because it's a lot mentally, I'd say, because I know a lot of people, you know, they talk about mum guilt a lot.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm not a mum, so I always joke about it. I'm like, just feed it and say you love it. And like it will suffice.
But it's true.
But I haven't met one new mum that hasn't said that they have some level of mum guilt. And that can be not to do with work, because some of them haven't gone back to work. There is something that makes them have mum guilt. And some of them, to people like me who don't have children, they look like really insignificant details that the child is definitely not going to remember or care about.
So true.
But there is like a bit of a vicious cycle of anxiety and guilt gnawing away at new mothers who already have to face so much.
Exactly.
Just to cope.
Yeah. And it's like it's the pregnancy journey. Trying to get pregnant is not easy. Like if you have baby loss, that's really fucking hard. Like if your pregnancies I was blessed. I had okay pregnancies. Didn't love it, but you know, I wasn't glowing and my hair wasn't thick and flowy, but I enjoyed them in some ways. Then the birth can be pretty good or pretty bad. Like I had 3, one of each type, I would say. So I think there's
a good type.
Oh, I mean, drugs are okay, but like, you shouldn't say that, but
you can say that.
I think so you've gone through, then you've got the post-birth, like physical recovery. Then you've got a thing that you have to look after. Then you have the relationship change that happens inevitably because you love something else now more than your husband or partner or whatever it might be. Then you have the dynamics of family wanting to get involved and give you an opinion, your friends, how they respond to being a parent. It's quite a lot.
And you don't look or feel like yourself.
No.
At all.
Imposter syndrome.
But everything's changed. I was thinking about this and I was thinking, how would I actually feel like the process of being pregnant, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But then when I actually have the baby, you know, when the baby's gone, it doesn't mean just like the stomach goes.
No, it's true. You're right. Exactly.
You have this whole different body to navigate, different clothes, different sizes. And, you know, I guess to some people that doesn't sound like a big deal, but I think most women would agree that if you don't feel like yourself physically and you look in the mirror and don't recognize yourself, that in itself is a really big mental challenge.
Yeah, definitely. And it definitely feeds into that whole imposter syndrome. You have it for being a mum. Am I a good mum? Am I a bad mum? Am I doing a good job? And then if you go back to work, you're like, I'm now a mum, therefore do people think differently of me? And now I have to leave the office at 4:30 to go and do nursery pickup. And is that making people think different of me? In all aspects of your life, like even in the mummy groups, there's like the judgy mums.
I don't know what
the judgy mums.
Like for me, all I've ever heard about mummy groups is
Not great.
making people feel bad about the way they feed.
Yeah,
and
it's literally that.
wait, is it breast? Is it bottle? Is it? And mine's sleeping through the night. Oh, congratulations, my life's a hell.
Do you know, my biggest turning point was I'm not very good at social media. I culled a lot of people on social media because I was seeing, and hats off to these people, I think they do exist. It's not me, and I've tried to make it happen and it didn't work, where they get up at 5 and then they do their like yoga routine and then they do their like, my kids wake up at 5. So if I want to do like me time, I'm up at 4, but I go to bed at like 9:30, 10. Do you know what I mean? Like I just couldn't make it work. And I remember just being like, oh, you're inspiring in so many ways, but actually I'm getting more negative energy than I am positive from this world. And now I'm lucky enough to find I found my people where we live now. I found my mummy friends who just get it. Like some work, some don't. We all share the same, feelings. We all love a glass of wine.
Yeah, you've got to kind of have the same sense of humor as well.
Exactly.
Because you've got the super sensible mums that drop food off with their child.
Yeah.
My mum used to always find that really rude. When someone came over to play and then the parent would hand over a plastic bag. And she'd say, what's this? Well, so I've got special, no artificial colour snacks, no sugar. Oh, are they diabetic? No, not diabetic, just...
Yeah, we've had that.
This is a bloody cheek. This is a complete cheek. I've got food in my house. Yeah. I cook.
My favourite is when so after your firstborn, you no longer give a shit. So with our first, we didn't really give him sweets or chocolate properly until he was maybe a year old. And now Georgie, who's 18 months, goes to the parties with the boys. And when they're giving out Haribo, giving out like sweet necklaces, she's right in there with it. Like it definitely becomes a quickly changed.
Also, it's survival mode. You know, if a Haribo is going to fix a big tantrum, you've got 2 hours back of your life.
Exactly. And then you go to a soft play party for 2 hours of peace, ideally. So
I wasn't invited to my nephew's soft play party.
Why?
Because they said, I phoned my brother and I said, invitations have gone out and apparently I haven't received one. He was like, but you said you don't like kids' birthday parties. I was like, not my own nephew. He's like, do you want to come to soft play at 9 o'clock in the morning and then have flu for the week? Because you will.
Fair. Yeah, that's fair.
Or be vomiting.
Yeah.
I was like, do you know what, we'll do a family tea.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Good, that's a good balance.
I think my opinion is from a non-mum point of view. So, but from looking on the outside in, we've come leaps and bounds when it comes to facilitating working mums and helping women find their place within the working world, despite, I don't know if despite's the right word, but going through pregnancy, birth, maternity leave. I feel like we've come so far. But then if you look back, let's say 30 years ago, people didn't have as much of a microscope on people's parenting.
Yeah.
And they weren't guilting themselves as much. Like I was speaking to my mum about this and I was like, talk to me about mum guilt. And she's like, I didn't have time. I had a C-section. Dad went back to work. I was taking you up the stairs and trying to not let my stitches rip, which they did when I laughed too hard. And there wasn't time to shame ourselves. And there were just, even if you look back when she was a baby, some women literally were
back to also work 2 weeks later or something. Yeah.
Or single parent homes.
Yeah.
Still, less so, but where they had to go out and work the whole day. Their 7-year-old would come home and prepare their own dinner.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
It wasn't, I feel, I can't speak for that generation, but, I feel like this agonizing and self-criticism just wasn't as prevalent back then
I agree.
As it is now. So what comes with there being great strides and facilitating people comes with people having a bit more time to sit and think about their situations.
Definitely.
And I think that in itself can be really, really toxic.
Really, I totally agree. I think, and now we're almost coming through to the point where companies are now doing the right thing in terms of, I don't think that many companies aren't, but like when it comes to putting things in place for things like mental health, stress, burnout. But like when you're talking about birthing, like post-traumatic stress that comes with birth, like postpartum trauma, all these things companies are now starting to think about in terms of their mental health offering, which is really important, I think. But I think the most important thing though is creating space for people to process it on their own, as in like letting them be at home if they need to be at home. You know, it's actually like just being flexible on all that piece.
Yeah, and understanding that things are going to come up and your day may not look the way you planned it to look and to...
Yeah.
But yeah, look, hats off to you. Do you have any advice for women that are navigating, whether it's pregnancy or being a new mum, and really don't want to sacrifice their career or juggle it, in fact?
Yeah.
Any kind of bits of advice that you wish that you'd known when you were doing this?
I've got one thing that really stands out to me, but I don't know what the answer is. But so when you're trying for a baby, no one talks about it to work. It's very rare that you talk about it to work. And that's because I think people are worried that the minute you tell someone you're trying for a baby, they're going to be like, well, you're not interested anymore, or you're not going to be here, and therefore. So I think like what I encourage all of my teams I work with now is to let's have a really good like fertility program, or like what it looks like for your family journey. Because I think that bit in itself is really fucking hard. And actually women who are going through, whether it's IVF or whatever, should be 100% supported by a business to be able to have what they want in their lives. And touch wood, it happens. We were blessed, I think, to have 3 gorgeous gremlins. But like our journey wasn't the easiest. And I think, I know I've got really dear friends of mine who are still going through those journeys. So I think that is like one big thing. You should talk to your employer without the fear that you're going to get sacked, because then they can help you. And that might look like you getting more days when you're having your IVF treatment or whatever it might be. And then also the first 12 weeks when you're not meant to tell anybody you're pregnant, it's when you feel dog shit, like you're vomiting, you're shitting everywhere, like you're just not in a good place. I mean, some people have beautiful ones. I don't like those people, but like again, like I think we need to normalize it to say people can talk about this. And also then if it does go wrong, which is why people tend to not talk about it, because the miscarriage rate is much higher in those first 12 to 14 weeks, then you've got support from your employer because you're going through a miscarriage, which is also really fucking awful. Like this is all the time that you need support from the people around you, and work's a big part of that. So I think I would encourage all people who are going through a journey or who are pregnant to talk to their employer earlier, put the onus on the employer to make sure they're looking after you properly at work.
I think that's fair, because a good friend of mine was going through IVF and she hadn't told her employers, and she works really long hours, but you know, her injection had to be done at a specific time. So it was like running, legging it for the train, have to make the exact train so that she can be home to do her injection. Because do you want to do it in your staff toilet?
Exactly.
Not particularly.
Yeah.
I mean, you could, I guess, but you shouldn't have to.
Yeah.
So I think it's about normalizing those conversations and realizing that everybody's journey looks really different. There are people who are egg freezing. There are people who are going through IVF. There is baby loss. There's pregnancy. There's, you know, and some pregnancies are really, really, really tough.
Yeah. A good friend of mine just had really severe sickness her whole way through. I felt for her, but she's a lawyer, senior lawyer, and she's working her ass off every day, working to 2 a.m, but like vomiting in between calls. And I just think there's got to be a better way nowadays to be able to deal with that, I think. The other bit of advice that I would say is to anybody, which I didn't do, and I got told this by my coach, is where are your boundaries and what do they look like? And because I put a lot of onus on the employer to make sure that they've created a really good space, but ultimately it's on you as the person who's going back to work. What can you work? What can't you work? What hours can you do feasibly? Like what won't make you kill yourself? Because I remember like boobing, breastfeeding Hugh on calls with my camera off in the evenings with the US team, because I was like, I have to work the US hours. And I've got a sweet like 5-week-old baby that I'm trying to feed. And in hindsight, I should have been like, no, I don't work in the evenings. No. Sorry, that's my time being a parent. But I didn't, because I felt like I should be working. But now I've got amazing clients now, and they're just my happy place. And I'm blessed, I think, that I've managed to find people that we have shared values. But I have the time blocked out in my diary when I'm with my kids and no one touches it. And on the weekend, by exception, I work if it's like something really important, but in the main, people respect your time.
I think boundaries is number one.
Yeah.
Because you should have the time blocked out to be with your kids and not have to have your thoughts elsewhere.
Exactly.
So I think boundaries is the best advice for anyone. Definitely. It's about establishing those boundaries though. Yeah. And you may know what boundaries you want to put in, but it may be difficult. You might feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
If you're not, if you're not the most confident person, you might feel uncomfortable having to raise those.
100%. And actually, we've got some really good stuff coming around the corner now with the flexible working bill, which I think I don't know for sure. I've done lots of reading on it and I still don't know quite how it all will look in practice. But I think there's some good guidance in the current bill around how employers should support. And there's a lot of people that can put a lot more requests, and I think I feel quite comfortable knowing that it's almost becoming the norm. We're trying to become a more flexible economy, I think. So hopefully.
Do you think it could go the other way though, where people take advantage 100%. And output is poor? And Definitely. Then how do you get rid of her? How do you sack a new mum?
Yeah.
Because there are, I think it's important to, highlight the fact that not everyone has the best intentions in the world. Not everyone's a good person. Right. There are going to be people that take advantage of the system.
Yeah.
And, how as an employer, especially a male employer, how do you safeguard yourself from people who are taking advantage and are pulling the mum card?
Yeah. No, but it's a fair
and then you have
position.
You have nothing to say back to that.
Yeah.
Particularly as a male, any employer, male or female.
Exactly. But I think as an employer, you should be, because it works both ways, right? Because some people are parents but they're asked for flexible working. Other people are trying to fall pregnant desperately and can't have kids. And you shouldn't be discriminating against those people either because they can't have kids. It's a very fine line. But I do think I would, and I've had this live 100 times over now, not necessarily just with mums returning, but people coming on flexible working and then not doing the flexible working hours that they've committed to. And we go through first of all, obviously you do that adult conversation, what's going on? Is this working or not working in a nice way? But then quite a lot of time we've gone through more of a formal process and that's the only frustrating thing here is rather than having an adult conversation, you have to go so by the book to protect yourself from employment risk that people end up spending a lot of time going through a formal HR process rather than just having a frank, which is what you should do, but they're worried about saying it.
They're scared.
Saying you're not pulling your weight because we think maybe when you're working, you're not able to do the hours. And actually the conversation could be really simple to say, is this too much? Or actually, do you need different hours? Or actually, do you not want to be working? And all of these options can be talked about if we just treat people like adults. But it's doing that in a way whereby I think you have to, as an employer, protect yourself to make sure people don't use a discrimination card unfairly.
Yeah, it's definitely balancing the fine line. Yeah, it's a fine line. And I think that's still to be navigated and defined. And
actually, I'm seeing it way more in tribunal side now. I think we went through this phase 2 years ago where we had lots and lots of discrimination claims coming through. In the past, there were tribunal fees where people had to pay a fee and then you notice them drop quite quickly, which has now been wiped. And it's slowly dropping down, but it became people were aware that they could go for discrimination. And actually probably a majority of those cases were very much discrimination and should have gone through. But I remember reading quite deeply about a number of people who had just put claims in, multiple claims with every single employer. But then they got found out, but there was no comeuppance to them for doing it to all those different employers. And it only took one employer taking it all the way to court for that to come to light. So there's some really big horror stories out there, but I do think they are by exception. I think in the main, the people that are claiming discrimination probably feel like they're being discriminated against, and that's on the employer to make sure you're not doing it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, as an employer myself, I've always tried to support my team when they're having children. But it's not when they're having children, even when they have children, they could have 7, 8-year-olds, something happens at school or, they have a sick child. So they're going to need to be off that day. And I've always tried to accommodate that. But there've definitely been scenarios where that's taken advantage of.
Yeah.
And it becomes, I think I make it too acceptable for them to say, I'm bringing my child to work today. It's I don't think I ever said you could do that.
Exactly.
But, I don't have a support network around me or that live near me. They need to come to work and then you're forced into a bit of a corner. So, I think it works. There's both sides of the coin. I think it's really hard for employers as well. But there are those employers that need to be held really, really accountable for their actions.
I think it really comes down to, talking earlier about the culture of the business. The big thing that I think is really important in culture is full autonomy and trust. And in that, each person knows their world and what they have to do in their role. And by doing that, I do in my current, where I'm with one of my clients, I know exactly what I need to do in the week. We set OKRs weekly, if you like. And to me, it's really clear. So if I do have, for example, I had it about a month ago, Ernest, my sweet Ernest, was on like his 6th bug in like 6 weeks. And it got to the point where I felt like I was a bit like, I'm sorry, he's sick again. Like, this is getting a bit ridiculous. But as an employee on their side, I was like, you've been so flexible. And they've always been like, just do what you need to do, work around it. But I felt obliged to then make it up in the week, because that was on me feeling like, you've been so great to me, therefore I'm going to be great to you. But that's because they give full trust, full autonomy. So I think there's some really, like, we don't talk about these things, but they're really important behaviors to instill in the business. And then you get loyalty back as an employer. And granted, did I work a couple of evenings? Yes. But had I looked after my kid when he was sick? Yes. So in my mind, I was like, that's a good balance for me. Like,
and it's okay sometimes. If you have to just do an hour here and there in an evening and you'll feel better that you've done a little bit of work.
Yeah. And everyone's happy then.
Yeah.
So I think that's a fair balance.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go into what exactly you do now.
Yes.
Because you were formerly Chief People Officer at Forward Partners, an early stage VC fund that we both worked at. Yeah. 48 hours. It's like 2 ships in the night.
It really was.
Yeah. What do you do now? Because you've got a few things going on, but I'd love to understand exactly.
So I've moved to doing a fractional role now. So I've got a handful of clients who I work with on a fractional basis. I'm really blessed that they are all really fun, quite cheeky at times, just really good companies where I'm having like the best time. I always say I genuinely at the moment, I'm in like my happiest place from an employment perspective. But I work for myself in terms of I set my hours. So I always have Fridays with the kids, which is beautiful.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
We go swimming actually, which is quite hideous.
That's awful.
Yeah.
A dirty lie down and some verrucas.
Yeah. But, you know, I feel good for it. And like we do some cooking together. I mean, it's not my natural place, but we do it all and it makes me feel good. And then I spread my rest of my time with a couple of clients and I absolutely love it. And the roles there are very varied. So I do a fractional head of people or CPO role for all of them. In the main, I do coaching of the leadership team or managers training. Some of it's very tactical. So I go in and write like the L&D program, or we're doing at the moment compensation frameworks and long-term incentive plans or LTIPs. So the roles are really, really varied. And that's what gives me like the best energy. So I'll walk in one week and we'll be doing salary reviews, kind of fun, but kind of easy. And then the next week we're going in and we're going through a whole reorg based on some fundraising they've just got in, like 10 million. And they want to work out how you grow the team really effectively and what roles do you need and how do we move people in the business in the right place. So I love this level of like flexibility and variety. And it works for me. I miss the like genuine your own team that you see every day, for sure.
Yeah, because you don't have that autonomy. But I do think, given your situation and being a mum to 3 such young kids, this probably is...
It's a good balance.
Yeah, a good balance. And obviously your goal is to create and foster really, really healthy cultures for companies, which is something you feel really passionately about. And I'm sure you've worked in good ones and bad ones.
Yeah.
Can we talk about things you've seen that make a toxic and unhealthy culture? Because you've obviously seen so many, I don't know how many, because you work with VCs.
So within the VC, you tend to work with your internal VC team and then multiple portcos. So
so you've probably worked with hundreds. Companies.
Yeah,
hundreds.
Genuinely, probably hundreds
so
of companies.
You are the best equipped person to say that's a healthy, good, fun culture with great output, and that is really toxic.
And interestingly, people, I think I've been challenged on this before when I said it out loud, but the companies that are doing well have got a good culture in the main. Like that's a relatively, there's exceptions to that, granted, but it's a relatively simple concept. Like create an amazing culture, you should do all right. Create a shit culture, you're probably going to go down the pan. Because there's going to be like, you're wasting money on settlement agreements because you're exiting people all the time. You've got complaints left, right and center. People are focusing their time on the wrong work if you have a crap environment. So I think there's a lot to be said for creating that really healthy culture. If I think about at the moment, so I don't mind name dropping them, but 3 of the companies that I work with at the moment quite closely as Cornerstone VC, Runner and The Body Coach. And they all are very different in terms of what they do and how they operate. But they all have honestly, the most incredible cultures. Like I'm proud to work there. I would tell everybody under the sun that I work there. But they do it in very different ways. But I think if I think about the crux of why they're such good cultures is everyone is genuinely their true authentic self. So people say things as they think them. There's no like, oh, I need to go and have a conversation with A, B, C, and then I'll do the team group meeting to make sure everyone's on my side before I go and say it publicly.
No, none of strategic.
None of that. They're very much like a really open, transparent feedback culture. And they've done that from day one. So the reason they do really, really well is people feel like they can just say it without the risk of being sacked or that they're going to be like doubted in the future. They just fix problems live and get it done and move on. And there's no like, oh, should I have done this? There's none of this like wasting my effort and thinking space on negative stuff. I've never really seen it done so well, but they all do it naturally. And I think when I really think about it, the reason is all the leaders in those teams, Runner in particular, for example, they've got 4 leaders there who are all so self-aware of like where they're great and where they can utilize the other people in the leadership team to do great work. It just is beautiful to be around. There's just no politics at all.
It's very refreshing.
It's so refreshing. But they get stuff done quickly because there's no politics. So like if you're moving a team from here to here, they think about it, they talk about it, they action it, it's done. So whereas some companies I work with, we're still working out our org chart from 2 years ago because we're iterating and thinking about it, and so-and-so is not too happy with it. We want to make sure they're okay. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but I think sometimes you can go so slow, you impact your business. So I definitely think there's lots around like your leadership quality are fundamental to a good culture. I think that becomes hard when you start taking bigger checks, and therefore you need to grow bigger. But what my current role is going to make sure that culture drifts into the managers then, and then they're all leaders. So they have to be the visionaries for the culture. And then as they bring in more managers, so it's quite a big part of our curriculum in all those businesses is to make sure that the managers or everyone that comes into a manager role is then accountable for a culture in their little mini unit. And I think that works really perfectly. I think where I've seen it done really hard, and actually something I don't know, you might have some advice for me, but where I find I can't fix the culture, and it's not my job to be really clear, it's the leadership team. It's not the people person's job to make you a happy culture at work. There's this weird opinion sometimes that I'm going to hire a people person to make the culture good. And it's like, oh no, that's not like what you need the
leadership to be on board and to have accountability.
Yeah, exactly. That's almost like step one when you go into a culture program. But where I think it's really bad for culture is like narcissism at the top.
This has been a hot topic on this podcast, and narcissistic leaders.
But they are, I would say most people, the majority of people are coachable. I'm coachable. I've definitely got 101 things I'm working through with my coach at the moment around how to be a better leader, how to be a better people person, how to be more commercial.
But you want to.
Exactly.
That's the key thing here. You want to. There are leaders who don't want to, and they think that they know best.
Yeah. And those are the people who I still find really challenging. I've read books and books and books around how to work with narcissists, and I still don't have like the golden ticket. If I did, I reckon I could sell it for millions. And it is impossible, I think, for me, and I would love some advice on it at some point. And how do you twist a culture to be positive when the person or people or group of people at the top are narcissists? Because ultimately, it's a very difficult thing because you think you're getting somewhere on day one and you're going back 10 steps. And I used to work in a few businesses like this that became really hard for me then as a people person, because you have an obligation, I think, to care, like show a duty of care to that person, also the leadership team. And that can be quite challenging.
The only way, I mean, first of all, I would say 9 out of 10 times, no incremental changes are made with narcissistic leaders at the top.
Yeah.
It just...
I would believe that.
Yeah. Some there are times where you have to say, look, I've done my best. I've given you honest feedback, action points. You don't want to follow any of those or take those in. We are where we are. That's it.
Yeah.
But occasionally, and this is so sad to have to go to this level, but occasionally I've sat down with them and I've said, I know that you don't care about diversity and inclusion. I know that you don't care about the mental well-being of your employees. I know. Yeah. However, I know you really care about building a successful company and making a lot of money. So I need you to show that you care about these things, even if in your heart of hearts, you don't give a toss. And genuinely, you will be more successful. You will be richer. You will have less headaches, lower attrition.
Yeah.
So, your choice is get on board or be prepared for a hell of a journey and not a good one.
Yeah.
And those rare occasions, they've sort of paused and thought, you're right, I do need to look as though I care about mental well-being. What program would you suggest to roll out? So they are willing to do it. Yeah. Their intentions are poor.
Yeah.
But does it matter if their intentions are poor? Sometimes and that's the thing I don't know the answer to yet. Because if the output is there and the frameworks are being put in place and they're following, correct protocols, and they're really listening to what people need, not because they care, because they know that it will lead them from A to C.
Yeah.
I'm yet to see, because it's too kind of early, whether that can have a long-lasting effect or whether the mask slips.
Yeah.
Because ultimately people, majority of people aren't stupid. They spend most of their time at work. When you have to have a close relationship with leadership, you learn, what every look means, the tone of voice. Yeah. So does it really work? Not sure. However, if you are a pure, utter narcissist and there is no hope for you ever not being a narcissist, then that's my only suggestion, is to go at it from that angle and say, I know you don't care, but you really need to look like you care.
Yeah.
It's really sad, but let's be realistic. Not everyone is a virtuous founder who cares about their people.
I think as well, if you have that where they're doing the right thing, irrelevant if they really believe it, if you can somehow protect their leadership team from the falsity of it, I think that helps. Because ultimately, you want to be inspired by your founder or your CEO, and then the leadership team get inspired by that person, they inspire their team, and it's all this beautiful cycle of but if it's, maybe you then just help, or we would then help hire those amazing, influential people below. You could have a phenomenal leadership team who, carry and build out those values within your organization, and you end up with a wonderful place to work. And I genuinely, I don't know about you, but I've definitely worked with people who have that. But when you meet the CEO or the founder, you think, that doesn't quite translate. So yes, it is 100% possible. However, when you're dealing with a narcissist, the very nature of narcissism is thinking that you know best. Yeah. So getting that person to that thinking around, I'm going to pass this down to other people, and letting the reins go a little bit. I don't know, but maybe that's where investors are useful, because investors that sit on your board, when you hear it from your investor and you think, right, this might affect my next funding round. You're right.
You start thinking, all right, I don't agree with them.
I'm going to show face and just say,
let's do that. Yeah. And therein lies the importance of having a phenomenal people team. A lot of people have said to me, I say people, founders, when they're going through a rough time, okay, who can we cut first? Or rather, not going through a tough time, but have just raised their first round. It's a perfectly healthy round. And we go through a hiring structure. Who are the important people to hire? And I always say, you do need someone in HR and people, because whether you have 5 people or 500, those are still 5 individual lives to navigate. Yeah. And do you want to end up in court several times?
Yeah, it's expensive.
It's expensive and could be avoidable. And also building out the framework and the foundations of a really amazing culture from day dot will save you so much headache.
I agree.
Than what most people do. We've just raised Series A. We've got 10 million in the bank. Yeah. Better get this old head of people in.
It's so true.
And you think, you're a bit late there.
Yeah. It's true. It's all the foundational pieces that the culture needs. So I think quite often when we think about culture, we think behaviors and values and virtues. But what we're actually saying is what's the environment like? How are we looking after them from a well-being perspective, from a comp perspective? Fundamentally, to foster a really healthy culture, they have to feel, they being the employees, secure in every aspect of employment. The pay is right and it's transparent and it's clear. Actually, on the note of transparency, I just did the Open Org bootcamp, and there's so many amazing people doing great things around that. Just being really open from day one. And I was like, everyone should do this. It's super easy. It's not super easy, but it's
but organizations should
get your shit in order. Yeah, it's good.
Yes.
But I think you can create all these pieces are all interlinked to culture. Rather than it being culture is just about behaviors and we should do a values workshop today because we want to talk about our culture. It's way more around the tactical foundational HR stuff, which needs to be in place before you can build on that, I think.
The basics, essentially.
It is the basics.
Because I think a lot of startup founders think, we can't afford this fancy chief people officer. You don't need a chief people officer.
Exactly.
You need someone who is, a junior, probably not, but you need someone who's sort of manager level, who understands the legalities, but also has the exposure and understanding and experience of fostering a good culture, which brings me to my next question. When you're advising a startup founder, what are kind of the key frameworks that you say, right, it's day one.
Yeah.
These are the things that we should put in. I know you don't have a lot of time and you don't have a lot of money, but here are like your basic foundations that you have to do now.
So we, at Cornerstone, for example, so I advise Cornerstone, when we make an investment, we give it all them for free. From an employee compliance piece is done. So they get their handbook. It's not a sexy handbook. It's not like a forward-thinking handbook, but it ticks the boxes for now. So they feel like they're compliant from day one. And then we do all the fun stuff. So we like give them some stuff for free so they can be like compliant. They can hire someone because they've got a contract template now, all of those things. So we do all those things, but then we do what we call a culture workshop. So we'll go in there and say, so let's talk about you. You're self-aware. What skills do you have? What values do you have that are really important to the business? And then we then start doing this thing called fix sides. So we have a little hexagon shape and we'll add these new shapes to it. So this is where, for example, if I was building a business, I love the operational side, finance, legal, ops, people, happy place, product, tech. No idea. I understand it because I've worked in those businesses before, but like I would be like, right, I need some help with here. Do I need an advisor? Do I need a part-time person? Do I need a permanent employee? And with them, what skills do I need to get brought in? But also what other values do I need to have brought in? What cultural pieces do I need to think about? So I'd probably say we do it quite tactically from an investment perspective. So here's your money. How do we grow properly? But also maintaining what skills we need to bring in, what values we need to bring in, how do we need to add to your culture, not shift your culture.
And Another big question that I get, which I think is an interesting one, and I don't think anyone has truly cracked yet. If you have a really, really great, healthy culture and you're very much startup phase, you raise a really large round and you're going to rapidly scale, how do you hold on to a really good culture?
And I love this. And we see it all the time. But my first question is, what are we holding on to? So which part of the culture right now do we love? Because this is a stereotypical comment, so I might be completely wrong now. But back in the heyday of startups and scale-ups, startups were like in the pub on a Wednesday. Everyone was best mates. Quite often people lived together. Like it was very much this like heyday, happy, social vibe. And that's what people were wanting to hold on to. That's just not realistic as you grow because people's lives evolve. So even if you kept the same team from 9 years ago or 6 years ago, they're going to grow and they're going to want to do different things. And they might not want to be in the pub on a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And that's not where the business meetings happen anymore. So I think my first question always is, what is it you want to hold on to from the culture? Because when you really drill into it, it's not the social elements. It's because people feel like they can be trusted or they have a really good time at work or their work's meaningful. And those are really easier, not really easy pieces of culture to drive forward because you just put in frameworks around doing it. I've seen companies do that where they're like, we want the good old days back. But the good old days are more just like the fun days where you're getting lashed. And that's not necessarily the good old days. That's not actually when your business is thriving or like you've taken money now and you've got investors. So you have a board to report to now. So we can't say to the board, we whack down the pub on a Friday now and do all out. You have to grow up with it, which is a good thing because you can put in frameworks in place and appeal to people who've got more experience. And I think there's just always a challenge around like scaling your culture. What is it you want to scale? And that's why I think we now do these culture programs whereby the leaders define the culture. What we're missing from a culture, how do we bring it in terms of leaders or elsewhere? And then we get the managers to really own culture for their little business units. And then they become accountable. And it becomes a very natural way of scaling the culture.
That makes sense. And and I'm sure you have loads of experience with this as well, a lot of the startups that I've worked with talk about wanting to hire the creme de la creme. Yeah. So they've just raised pre-seed. Yeah. Nobody's heard of them. It's not the sexiest product. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. But as people and talent people, it's our job to sell the dream. Yeah. They want Netflix, Facebook, Spotify employees. They want the best of the best. Yeah. You think, there are some really great people that haven't worked at large, or obviously they have awesome people there. Yeah. But there are also really talented people that haven't worked at those companies. Because then there's the whole argument around like socio-economical backgrounds, because they didn't go to the best university, they won't get into one of the larger companies ordinarily. Mm-hmm. And then you're missing really great talent. Yep. But what I always say to them is, okay, so we've hired a software engineer from Facebook for you. Well done.
Yeah.
We've got them to decrease their salary by 40K. Well done. How are you going to keep them?
Yeah.
And it's about how do you foster really, really hungry, ambitious, high-performing individuals that are used to structure, have never, ever, ever been in the chaotic world of startups. Is there a secret sauce or any sort of key examples where you can draw on and think, these are the things you should really put in place to keep those people really engaged?
So my first thing is we now do behavioral interviews quite heavily for the pre-seed investments that we make. So when we're interviewing for their teams, we'll go through like the behaviors that the business currently exhibit. And that is like scrappiness, ambiguity. We don't have like a Gyro board, we don't have a Trello board at the moment. We're literally operating on like a notes page in Apple that we all, do you know what I mean? We actually go really detailed into this is how we currently work, which is a bit of a mess. And in that, we really get to dig into like, how will you cope? Like, how would you approach it? And that kind of makes it a really live environment that people realize what they're walking into. So first of all, that removes the whole, they come in thinking they're going to get the dream job because we've oversold it so well in the interview process. And then they start and they're like, what on earth is this place? It's an absolute disaster. So I reckon one thing we've definitely shifted is making it really raw in the interview process. And we have this bit called the values match at the end, where with the founders, we get to do a values match with anyone they're bringing in, which is this is how I operate. It's my business though, and it's my baby. So I know that I work 7 days a week, all evenings. Here's what I expect from you. Does this work? And they have a really good, meaty chat. What that also does from day one is starts like this really open feedback dialogue, which I like. And then once they start, the way we keep them engaged is ultimately the work is super meaty. That tends to be the way that we've been doing it so far. That can teeter off as you start adding more people in. But ultimately, for example, if you're the first dev or you're the first product person in a pre-seed startup that's just an idea that maybe has like a few prototypes built, it's actually quite fun.
Yeah.
The work's fun.
Yeah.
Like, you're getting user research directly to you, user feedback directly to you to build and iterate on. That's really exciting. I think the bit that's hard to keep people in is when you're doing, like trying to sell that product and no one's biting. And like, that's the bit that's really exhausting. Or you go to market strategy, fails. So what's next? And those are the bits where to keep people engaged there is, again, this like really, a really open culture to say, let's work together to fix it. Failure's okay. We'll just do it quickly. And then we'll move on to the next bit. So I think fundamentally at that phase, it's like the work type is how you retain them. With a goal, and this is the dream goal, which isn't necessarily always reality, is that when you take your next round of funding, then you're going to give them their 40K increase from their Facebook date, whatever it might be. You then start looking after your employees on a more tangible basis. Yeah,
that makes sense. And are there any key attributes that you've seen in any of the founders that you've worked with that you think that's really brilliant and that's why you're successful?
So Nicky at The Body Coach, as an example, he is just pure gold. He's just in fact, all of the like founders of all the companies I work for, like Dom at Runner, Ben at Runner, Rodney and the team, they all are just genuinely good humans. And I mean that in a really genuine way. Like they're just really good people who want to do good work. They want to look after people. They're not trying to scrimp and save and they do really good things for people. I don't know how you would test for a good person in a founder, but they genuinely like have an appetite to learn.
An old lady falls over.
Yeah. What were you doing?
And drops 20 pounds.
Yeah.
Do you take the 20 pounds?
This is exactly it. But I think what they do really beautifully is they know their own skill set. They're super self-aware. So they know where they're good. They know where they need to hire around them. They have hired around them. They know where they want to lean in because that's where their expertise are. And they do it in a really non-arrogant ego way. That's another thing I would say is they all know ego. So I think quite often with founders who are the opposite, who are troublesome or don't have good attributes, is they think they know best. And therefore they don't want to be self-aware. They don't want to learn. They don't hire around them properly because they just hire people like them. So you got more like people that lack any awareness and you just create the same problem. But I think what their skill sets are that I really like in this leadership teams are they're self-aware. They want to get better. They're all coaching themselves to make sure they get better. I think that's really, really important. The other thing I think is really important in a founder trait in particular is like knowing when they need to go for money, when they don't. There's this like lovely buzz when you're a founder about raising money from a VC or whatever it might be. And that's not always the right way to go. Like we've definitely met pre-seed ideas who were like, you don't need money here. Like you can probably do this yourself or through an angel round that you've just finished. That's probably enough. And like, I think there's almost this kudos that comes with like, oh, I've raised money from a VC and therefore, and that's when you really drill into like the founder's drivers. Like, is it because you want to build this great product? Or Or is it because you kind of want to be on the face of TechCrunch and like working out what is their driver? And that's not a bad thing, by the way. That could be that their role is like the evangelist of the business and they're going to be external facing. But I think there's definitely drilling into why they're doing this. Do they genuinely want to make an impact in whatever industry that is? Like, it could be anything.
Yeah.
And then like make sure they're self-aware, I think is a really big trait. And we do management team due diligence at Cornerstone and really test for that, which I think is really helpful.
And then interestingly, the flip side. The worst traits you see in founders.
Well, definitely the narcissism piece. But that there are, I'm like, I'm working with my coach on this. Is like, what are the superpowers of narcissist? Because there must be some, because we've all got superpower, we've all got flaws. There must be something that we can really hone in on. So
there definitely are superpowers of narcissists because they can stomach a lot.
Exactly.
And you need to have a strong stomach to be a startup founder.
It's so true.
So I think that is a key.
There's definitely
a key one. And then sometimes you do have to be cutthroat and make really, really, really difficult decisions.
Yeah.
Now they're going to find that easier because they go to sleep at night like a baby. Yeah. Yeah. They don't think that person might not afford their food shop next week.
Exactly.
Great for a narcissist.
That's a really good point, actually. Those are probably traits where you're right. Some startups do need that like level of resilience. They need to be pretty ballsy. These are probably traits you could hone in on. How much
cash do you think founders have burnt through going, I know that person's not right for the business, but they've got family and they've got loads.
Too much. Yeah.
Right.
100%.
So having a narcissist at the helm, very problematic in a lot of ways. However, they will make difficult decisions. They will stomach anything, which means that they won't be toppled over easily. People won't take advantage. You're going to put a lawsuit against a raving narcissist. You're going to think twice about that.
Yeah, it's true. You're right.
So there's a lot of upsides. Just, they're just horrible to work with. But there's a lot of upsides.
Yeah.
But then, more on the downsides and like the poor traits. Obviously, narcissism is one.
I also think this narrow-mindedness, like I've definitely, you'll have seen this 10 times over more than I have, is that some founders who come from a certain background and only think that if you have like a first from a certain university degree, or if you're in a certain circle, that you're going to be the right employee for them. And I personally really struggle with those humans because they're completely missing like cognitive diversity in their team, or like any form of diversity in their team, quite frankly. And for me, I genuinely fundamentally, hence why I work with Cornerstone, believe that diverse teams will be incredible, and that's where you get your financial return. Like that's why we invest in diverse teams, because we can know that the money would come back will be better. Like that's genuinely why we do it. So for me, some of the founders who just hire people like them, I find they're the most challenging because they have got a lack of awareness. They don't recognize the importance of diversity of thought or background or anything. And in that, quite often you get this like, I know best profile because they're surrounded by people who are saying the same thing as them. Therefore, they are right. And I think from an investment perspective, quite often those are the companies that go too slow.
Yes. And I think if you hire everyone in the room that's like you, how are you going to complement each other's skills? Because one person might be great at one thing, one at another thing. And this has definitely been, I think this definitely falls into the IQ versus EQ argument, because we've both worked with people who, great, their IQ is through the roof. They went to Oxbridge. On paper, amazing. But real time,
difficult.
The EQ.
Which is such an important part of leadership.
It's not there.
Yeah.
And arguably, how can you manage people in any capacity? Because, if you are the founder of a company or senior leadership, you're going to have to deal with people.
Yeah, you're right.
If you want to build a company, you have to deal with people. What kind of level of EQ do you need? And I said this to someone recently and they were like, but look at people like Steve Jobs. He was neurodivergent and, he wasn't the greatest at tuning into people's needs and wants. I said, that's absolutely right. But Steve Jobs wasn't the person who was managing every team and leading people. Yeah. He was the genius at the helm, but he was smart enough to know that he needed to hire around him people with skill sets. Yeah. Wow. People with skill sets that he didn't have. So it's okay not to have high EQ.
I totally agree.
It's okay not to have high IQ. I mean, you might struggle a little bit, but hire around you what you don't need. And arguably, I think when people ask what are the ugliest traits in leadership teams and founders, they go straight to they're nasty, they're narcissists, they're selfish, they're controlling, they don't care. But actually, there are some really, really lovely people who don't belong in leadership positions. 100%. And they are also not fit. They're not fit for the role, but those are also really bad qualities for a leader. So I think it's also important to pay homage.
Yeah, I agree.
To those people, the lovely people who you definitely want at your barbecue on a Sunday, but you definitely
need in your team.
They're not going to be floating a company on FTSE
this is it.
100.
I think it's also making that okay. Like we have this debate all the time, right? Like when people are growing up their career, like ultimately they have to become a manager and then they're a head of and then they're a C-suite. That's also not the case. Like you can become really great in your career being an individual contributor. Granted, sometimes it's harder. Certain worlds don't allow it. But like, I think there's this assumption that you have to be really wanting to do all these like empathetic leadership type pieces. But that isn't for everyone, and that's also okay. I would say for my coaching clients, I spend a lot of time coaching EQ. So they're super, super, super smart, really high IQ, really struggling on leadership at the moment because it's just not natural to them.
Can you teach EQ?
I think it's a similar sort of debate. I mean, they're not narcissistic people, but like it's a similar sort of thing around they're having to plaster it a little bit at the moment. So we go through like very softly teaching them some toolkits around it, and they practice that. And then because they're practicing it, becomes a habit. And then because it's a habit, it becomes a norm. And therefore they're starting to do it and it becomes a bit more natural. I think inevitably it probably always feels to your employees a bit odd if they know what you were like before. And then they're suddenly seeing this new version of you where you're asking how they're doing today.
How was like, your weekend?
What you're after. But I think it is coachable. It's harder to coach, but it's coachable. Whereas if someone's lacking like the IQ side, you know, you can teach quite a lot. You need the right drive to want to learn, but you can teach quite a lot around the IQ side.
And let's move on to mental health in the workplace, because that's a really, really big topic.
Yeah.
So it should be. I think people's mental health has suffered for long enough in workplaces.
Yeah.
Most people have suffered at some point in their working lives from poor mental health, whether it be from circumstance or it just happens.
Yeah.
What kind of positive changes are you seeing? And equally, what are the things that founders or leadership can implement or that you've seen really work well to best support mental health?
So I think what I'm seeing a lot of, but I don't know that I buy into they fully work, is like people now granting mental health days or well-being days, or people like granting this extra time basically for your mental health, which I think one is really valuable if people use it proactively to protect your mental health. So like every month you take a day to yourself, and it's whether it's you need to be in nature or you need to go to therapy that day, like creating a space where it's useful. I think what some companies are doing that was using that as a stamp to say like, look, we're all about well-being because we give you a well-being day, and that's not getting to the crux of the problem. And so what I think is making it a really raw conversation internally, and some companies do this really, really well, where people talk about their mental health. So I've got one client in particular where people talk about their anxiety at work, or people have spoken about their depression, and they've got like little units around them, like armies around them of people that will help them get through dips. I think those are things where that comes from the culture. That's not through a well-being day initiative. That's solely from having a culture where people are bringing their true authentic self to work because they feel safe. And so I think it comes back down to creating an environment where people feel like they can just say it as it is. Same with the pregnancy piece, right? Like I can say I'm pregnant because I don't get judged here. Like it's the same as saying like, how are you feeling one day? So I think there's part of me around, I'm seeing lots of people talk about well-being. They do like stuff for Mental Health Awareness Week, which is, I'm not criticizing it, it's great. But like, is it a surface level thing that you're PRing, or is it something you really talk about internally after the date? And that's the bit I think there's two camps there. I think people do it for the sake of it, so they look good. And then the people that genuinely give a shit about people's mental health. What I think companies can do better is talk to people about like burnout, stress, because those are quite often like your typical mental health traits you see in the workplace that we could be preventing, because that could just be a workload problem, or it could be the way the manager speaks to them in a communication. It could be the way you're delivering feedback. These could all be triggers for people's mental health that we don't know because we don't talk about it. So I think there's some really tactical work-based questions that you can just bring into a one-to-one to help prevent. I don't disagree with the wellbeing days. I think it's a good way of doing it, but I think you need to give people ideas around how to take them, what they should be doing with it, rather than people feeling nervous putting it in their calendar, being like, oh, I'm taking one of my 12 mental health days. I hope that's okay. Do you know what I mean? Like it needs to become really natural, which means you need to talk about it.
Yeah, I definitely think it's the talking about it piece. I think also there's often employers say to me, is it my responsibility? And I say absolutely, because these people are working for you the majority of their lives, working lives, hours wise, they're spending most of their time with you.
Yeah.
And you do have a certain, responsibility of care to these people. And a lot of them say, how do I distinguish between the ones that really are struggling mentally and the ones that say, I'm having a bit of a down day, I'm going to take the day off.
Yeah.
But they're not. They're just a bit hungover.
Yeah. And that's the difference, I think.
There's always a grey area, but I think there's a grey area with everything.
There is.
And it's not an excuse to ignore it. But then it is important to highlight the fact that people do take advantage of those benefits. And how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I hear you. I think I totally agree with you by Brand saying like, yes, you should be doing something about it. I think as an employer, you're going to get the best out of the employee when they are at their, being their true best self, which means they need to invest time in themselves. So I'm not saying that employers should pay for all of their therapy, or, it'd be great, but if there's stuff that's gone in their personal life, but it's impacting their work, try and create an environment that they can be supported by. So I think there's stuff that companies can do. Ultimately, though, it is on the employee to get themselves better. I think ultimately, I could say as an employer, I'll pay for 20 sessions of therapy for you, but if you're not going to turn up to the therapy session, or you're not going to give it enough time and consideration in your day, then we can't fix it together. So I think it's something around work and then personal. But I think the majority of work comes from making space for them to go and deal with where they need to deal with. I think the bit around the people that take the piss, it is such a hard one to navigate, because the other thing with that is everyone responds differently. So I'm a pretty happy person. I'm blessed to be my parents are pretty happy to personas, and we've all got the same sort of profile. So I could probably cope very differently with some stuff than probably my husband, who he's not an unhappy person, but I'm annoyingly chipper and he's probably a bit quieter. And so even he and I have got really different coping mechanisms, different tolerance levels. So how that then translates into work is I can't say to person A to person B, you should be okay because your thing's not that big a deal, but yours is a really big deal, so we need to give you more support, because how they're coping could be exactly the same. So I think that's where this trust piece needs to come into play. You need to trust people to be able to account for what they need. But it's a really hard balance, because you will ultimately have the odd person that takes the piss.
Yeah.
And I think you have to kind of suck it up, because if one person's taking the piss but 20 other people are being supported and looked after, is that a good enough ratio? I think it's okay.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Solid argument.
Yeah.
Finally, last question.
Yeah.
You don't have to name names, but you can.
Okay, good name. Okay. I love a name game.
All right. You have a startup.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't know what it's called.
Yeah. Something good though.
Nat.
Yeah. Okay. Great name.
Okay. It's great. It's a tech platform that
lovely
predicts behavior.
Yeah.
Completely just thought of that.
Yeah, I love
you
that.
should do it. And you have just received investment and you can hire 5 people.
Okay.
It's your dream team.
My dream team.
Now you can either say what kind of people those are.
Yeah.
Or you can literally name names of people you would grab.
Nice. So I'm going to pretend like they've all got completely different skill sets, because ultimately you probably need a product person, because that's not me. But I think about the person, not the people. Oh, I've got so many. So my first maternity cover at Forward was a guy called Sam Cushing, who's now is one of my best friends. So he was the most supportive human from a people perspective when I was off, made sure I was okay, made sure I felt like I was secure being off. Great human. He's also though another people leader who thinks very differently to me. And I freaking love it, because we have debates sometimes, or I'll be like, I'm thinking about this, just voice note each other all the time. What do you think? And he'll be like, no, mate, you should be doing this. And I'm like, well, no, mate, why don't you think that? And we have this really good, healthy debate. I can be my true, authentic self, get debated with and challenged really hard. And he's probably the first person I feel challenges me properly in my domain.
Yeah.
So I think that is a really positive influence from a happy perspective, but also good challenger.
He's going to get a lot of in-mails now, isn't he?
Yeah, he's really great. It's annoying. He's probably better than me, actually. But
No, we don't do that. The self-deprecation.
No, yeah, you're right. Now I'm way better.
Girl power.
Who else did I hire? This is a really weird thing to say, but I'd hire my brother. He's in the army though, so his skill set wouldn't. It's very transferable because he just gets shit done. He's just a hardcore worker.
Yeah,
and I really like that. It influences me positively. Hi, Carl Martin.
I knew you were going to
also
say
know.
Carl. Shout out to Carl,
Shout out to
who's
Carl.
an all-round incredible human.
He's just like good energy, raw though. Will tell you the raw, honest truth about life, which I really appreciate. He's a deep thinker though, is why I was thinking about it. So I've got like Sam, who's like my good challenger, my brother who gets shit done, Carl who thinks deep. So like we'll have a problem, and rather than me being like, oh, we had this last week, what about this as an idea? He'd be like, let me properly think about this. And he'd come back with this brand new way of thinking and thinking about things that would be incredible.
And what does Carl do, just so that everyone understands?
So Carl is now a learning coach. He does group coaching with us at Wonderfully, actually. He's fantastic. He created his own business off the back of his time at Forward and Farewell, called Peerpod. He's also about to have a baby any minute now.
Oh,
He's just the best. And his future wife's also amazing.
okay.
So they would definitely be in my life. Who else would I have?
You've got 2 more.
This is so difficult. I would basically have like an amalgamation of like the Cornerstone team, the runner team, and the body coach team, because they are just so good.
No, you've got to pick 2 people. Specifics. It's okay, because you can have like more people you'd want to hire. You won't offend anyone.
I won't offend anyone. Who else would I?
You don't have to know them either.
Ah, okay, this could be interesting. Actually, do you know who I would have? You also know. Do you remember Dharmesh?
Yes.
Product.
Yes.
Again, because I think he's just a genius.
He's a head
No
of
one
product.
knows it. Yeah, he's a head of product, but he is a genius.
Yeah.
Like you give him a product problem and like he's done it. And you're like, well, we've been thinking about this for days.
And a lovely guy.
And just a really good human.
Yeah.
Is he in Sicily now or something?
I have absolutely no idea.
Sardinia. He's living like his best life.
I'll tag him in this.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. And my last person would be, she's actually one of my best friends. Her name's Steph, and she's like a proper operator.
Yeah.
She just would like keep me in check. I'll be like trying to pay for lunch. She'd be like, negative. Make sure you're on track. She keeps me true to myself at home, like in our personal lives. Like we do spin classes together, and like our kids are friends. You know, like she's one of those good people around me that just is good influence.
Yeah.
So that's probably my 5. Not even any famous people in there.
You wouldn't know, I guess, if you don't really know much about.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a few like rugby players I'd have thrown in there just for good
Rugby
measure.
players?
Yeah, I feel like
For
they've got,
what's your motivation behind?
I feel like they're quite resilient, aren't they? Because they're
Resilient,
really resilient.
Resilient.
People. Pretty tough.
Tough.
So, yeah.
Strong.
Exactly. And you might need a bodyguard. You never know where you're going in these situations.
Yeah, it can get ugly and messy.
Yeah, startups is ugly. Yeah, it's true.
It's a cruel world out there.
It is.
But you're making it better one step at a time.
Yeah, slowly.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Henry.
And I can't wait to see your further trailblazing,
Fingers crossed.
your collection of kids.
Yeah, no more. Yeah.
No more? Okay. And
I would hire all of them, actually. I should have definitely said my 3 kids would be in my business.
they are under 5.
Yeah, they're offering very little at the moment, but they are very good at like criticism, keeping me very raw. So maybe they would have been great additions.
You make the little cheerleaders on the slide.
It's true.
I can't wait to see where you go, what you achieve, but I know you're going to set the world on fire, and people like you just make it a better place.
Thank you. Likewise.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks.